Hey, how's it going? And today we are going to be covering a little bit of ground today. We're going to be talking about global variables, weak maps, and GetSession, or the session type. And so let me show you what I put together here to give you a working example. What we're going to do is we're going to create a global variable so this one device can reference this other device. A global variable, you use a weak map. That's one way that you can create a global variable. And then there's also something called a session type, which is very interesting, and it's taken me a little while to get my mind around it. But what's going to happen here, let me hit F, is that the device on the right is going to disappear, and then it's going to reappear, and then it's going to disappear, and then it's going to teleport right over here. And then as soon as it teleports, that device is going to disappear. So this is just showing you how they can communicate by way of this global variable reference. So I'll just go start, and here we go. Device disappeared. It's going to reappear. Now it's going to disappear again. And then it's going to teleport in right over here. And then that device, the other device, disappeared. So that's the functionality, just to show you what it can do. Here we got this one verse device. It doesn't do anything really. It doesn't take in anything else. And then there's this one. This my verse device has a reference to a direct reference to this one through the @editable. So let's take a look at this in code and see what we've got. So this is the my verse device, right? So it's of the creative device class. And you'll notice one thing that I didn't really appreciate was creative device is just specifically for verse devices. It's just something to be aware of. Anyway, it's of the creative device class. And here I just create a vector. Here we create an @editable reference to the other creative device. And then on begin play, we call this initialize global variable. And the one thing I wanted to show you was that the global variable is at the module level, but it doesn't have to be in here. It's actually in this other verse device. So in this other verse device, we have a global variable here, and it's a variable called myMap, and it's a weak map. And I guess I should talk a little bit about the weak maps. I made a note here that weak maps are associated with global variables because one way to make a global variable is by using a weak map with a session type. And that's straight out of the verse documentation. A session is a data type that returns a reference corresponding to the current round being played. There is only one instance of it per round. What I've learned from this one instance per round, what that means is that if I call session type from here, like GetSession within this device, I can't also call it from within another class or another device. I can only call it in this one instance. I can't be calling it all over the place. I could only reference it here. So if I tried to take the same functionality and call it from over here, it wouldn't work. It only works within the same class. So there's only one instance of it. So here I have an instance of it. I can't put this then in another device or class. It won't work. A weak map is essentially a superclass of a regular map. So it's a regular map, but it doesn't have all the same functionality that a map actually has. It can't access the map's length, it can't iterate over the elements, and it can't use concatenation, and you need a weak map. You have to initialize it in a function. So those are all the kind of things about a weak map as opposed to a map. And you can't iterate over a weak map's elements because it has no length. The main thing you'll be using it for probably is to create these global and persistent variables. So it's good to know. So all this does is it creates a map, and it's a weak map, and we tie it to the session and the creative device, which is specifically for our verse device. And then we just make a map here. And then on begin play, we just print out a string. That's all we do. Then over here is where everything's really happening here. We create a hard reference essentially to the other creative device. And then what we do is we call this function here. So the weak map has what's called a key and a value. If we come back over here, the key is the session, and remember there's only one instance of that, and I think it's essentially an ID or something. And then there's a creative device, which means our verse device, right? So this is the key by which we'll be referencing the value, a value, and the value is a reference to our creative device itself. So here what we're doing is we're essentially using the key to set the value to self, and self refers to this creative device itself, to my verse device. So that's another example of where the self variable comes in, that we can use it to set a reference to this device itself. So here we're just setting the key to its value right here. And then once we have that set, right, then we can call the key and assign it to this name, to this reference here, device reference. Then once I have this reference, so I can call a reference to my own device here, right? So I'm turning it on, hiding it, showing it, hiding it, showing it, and then here I'm teleporting it, right? Then what I can do is I can call it again, because we're all in the same, within the same class. I can call it again and set it to the second verse device here. And then here we're setting it, yeah, so here we're resetting it to the other verse device right here. And we're telling it to hide. It's interesting because it's basic, but it's complicated at the same time. It can get really confusing at the same time. There's just so many limits. And the other thing that can be confusing is that things are changing all the time too. So just know that you need weak maps to create global variables. Global variables are scoped here at the module level, right underneath the modules. They can be seen by every other class, and therefore any other class can access them. What's unique about this is that we're using the session, and then that comes with its own limitations that we noted over here. It can only be used within one class. It can't be used in other classes. There's only one instance of it. And it's subject to change in the future too. There might only be one per game instance coming in the future. So I guess the takeaway for that is don't build your whole world around that session type, because it's going to change in the future. So if you use it, just be careful how you're using it. Don't make it such a key part of everything, because if it breaks or changes, you might have to rewrite your code, your whole code. If I find out I made an error here in what I said, I'll post an update to this video, but I'm just getting my mind around what's coming next, and that is the change that happened to the Get Creative Objects with tag. And so the next tutorial is going to be addressing that, but before we get into that, it's important for you to have your mind around this, and then in the next section it'll all be a lot clearer. So anyway, I'll see you in the next tutorial.